All right, well, greetings, friends. Great to see everybody tonight, both in person and online. Welcome to the much anticipated celebration. I'm just getting started. Of Pat Browne's breathtaking theological memoir, Seed Corn Must Not Be Ground. This handsome volume is hot off the press and is available now wherever fine books are sold. Or you may purchase it directly from Pat, who will be selling and signing copies after our panel discussion tonight. In fall 2020, Pat audited my course, History of Modern Theologies, everyone's favorite course here at United. Near the end of the term, after studying and discussing the work of the womanist theologian Dolores Williams, Pat sent me an email I will never forget. In it, she recounted harrowing details from her childhood, interlacing these stories with profound meditations on surrogacy, survival, and the nature of redemption. Overwhelmed and utterly transfixed, I replied immediately, thanking her for trusting me with such intimate and painful memories. I then offered a suggestion. Pat, I gently prodded, I think you could write a magnificent book that combines personal narrative, spiritual devotion, and deep theological reflection. Like all of my students, Pat heeded my advice. Spending the next year and a half drafting Seed Corn Must Not Be Ground, a book I got to read as it was being written. Seed Corn is a riveting and exquisitely written memoir about trauma, loss, resilience, and finding salvation in the remains, in the companionship of animals, in the grace of community, in the love of a partner, in the sanctuary of family, in the sacrament of language. But it is also a theological memoir, one that sees divinity in and even as the world in all its tragedy and beauty, contingency and serendipity. Most of all, it is a raw and searing glimpse into the abyss of suffering and a stunning vision of the spiritual and theological possibilities that lie on the other side. In a few minutes, Pat will share a short reading from this sublime and sacred memoir. However, we also have a wonderful panel of respondents. So before I turn the floor over to Pat, who will speak first, let me quickly introduce all of our panelists tonight. Our first panelist, and feel free to put him up on the screen here, even though you're not speaking quite yet, Wesley. Our first panelist is no stranger to United, at least if you have taken any of my courses. Dr. Wesley Wildman is a philosopher, theologian, ethicist, and computational scientist. He is the executive director of the Center for Mind and Culture, the president of Just Horizons Alliance, a founding member of the International Society for Science and Religion, the author or editor of dozens of books and hundreds of scholarly articles and essays, and a professor at Boston University, teaching in both the School of Theology and the Faculty of Computing and Data Sciences. Since he obviously has oodles of spare time, Dr. Wildman also founded Wild House Publishing, a nonprofit independent press that exists to enliven the spiritual quests of people outside or on the margins of religious and spiritual traditions. Seed Corn is the latest addition to its ever-expanding catalog of transformational books. So I've invited Dr. Wildman to share some brief remarks about Wild House Publishing and how Pat's memoir fits into the mission of the press. Our second panelist is our student respondent, Ryan McLaughlin. One of the best students I have ever had. Ryan graduated from United in April with an MA in Religion and Theology. He will begin a PhD in psychology this fall at Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen, Scotland. He teaches religious studies at an Episcopal school in Tampa, Florida, where he lives with his wife, their 3 children, and a very spoiled dog named Ozzy. Ryan notes that he is absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to celebrate Pat Browne and her extraordinary book. Speaking of extraordinary, our third panelist is Dr. Andrew Packman, our faculty respondents. A brilliant scholar, a beloved teacher, and a beautiful human, Dr. Packman is assistant professor of theological ethics and formation, supported by the McVeigh Chair in Christian Ethics. He is also United's program director for formation, an ordained minister in the Disciples of Christ, and an emerging expert in the thought of Friedrich Schleiermacher. His first book, tentatively entitled The Atmospherics of Race and Intransigent Evil, a theological hermeneutics of racism's affective life, is currently under review at Cambridge University Press. Over the last 5 years, Dr. Packman has managed to persuade all of us, students and colleagues alike, that formation is not just a discrete topic of study, but the highest aspiration of a theological school. And what, pray tell, is formation? Well, according to Dr. Packman, formation is about widening the aperture of our souls, seeing reality as it is, and fundamentally transforming our ways of being. If that is what formation is, then I think it is fair to say that Pat's memoir is, above all perhaps, a work of theological formation. Our fourth and final panelist is my cherished friend and perpetual teacher, Dr. John Thetomenal. Now, for United book events, we typically invite an outside respondent. But at this point, Dr. Thetomenal is practically an ex officio member of the United faculty. In 2025, he delivered a rousing commencement address on desiring truth in a post-truth era, which is also the focus of his current research and writing. Even though Dr. Thetomenal continues to shape the hearts and minds of students at United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities, he actually receives his paychecks from Union Theological Seminary in New York City, where he is professor of theology and world religions and director of the Insight Project. A prominent Paul Tillich scholar and comparative theologian, Dr. Thetomenal is the author of 2 books, The Immanent Divine, God, Creation, and the Human Predicament, and Circling the Elephant, a comparative theology of religious diversity. The latter is required reading in several United courses and figures prominently in the concluding chapter of Seed Corn. We will hear from each of these esteemed panelists shortly. But first, we get to hear from our dear Pat. A former nun English professor, hospital chaplain, and campus minister, Pat later served as civil rights director with the United States Department of Agriculture. In 2023, United granted Pat a Doctor of Humane Letters, honoring the myriad ways she has enriched and blessed our community over the last several years. Among many other things, she has been a writing coach for several students. And since spring 2025, she has taught a biannual course on theological writing. But Pat is so much more than a writing instructor. She is also an artist, a healer, and a theologian. She is an encourager, a confidant, and a wise counselor. She is a sister, a mother, and a grandmother. She is, in the words of John Thetomenal, an earthbound yet God-intoxicated saint. Friends, please join me in welcoming our author, Dr. Pat Browne.
Yeah, breathe. Good evening, everyone. It means so much that you are all here. I am completely overwhelmed. On Zoom or here in person. It really means the world to me, really it does. So thank you so much. Undoubtedly, as Dr. Wheeler introduced the panelists, you might have noticed that they are all men. And so I wanted to say a word about that before we get started. And all I can say is that over time, each of these amazing humans came to mind as exactly the right choice. And when I myself noticed they were all men, I made a really intentional decision to just let that be. So no apologies, no explanations are forthcoming. I am utterly grateful for their companionship. Also, though, I want to assure you that the women are here too. First, I'm here, though I'd much rather be under a rock somewhere. And may need to find one before the evening is over. And I know that one of my preternaturally shy friends on Zoom would probably be really happy to hang out under that rock with me. But there are others too. My sister Sheila is here in the front row, right there, because I couldn't get through this without her. She's the little sister I failed to protect, and who has long since forgiven me for being an inept and impatient surrogate parent, and who, with no model to follow, among all of her other magnificent accomplishments as a corporate executive and as an artist. Thanks. She has herself also become an absolutely amazing mom against all the odds. My partner Aggie, who died from breast cancer when she was only 47, is here too. You will meet her in the book, but if you want to know Aggie, just think, not Pat. Aggie was hilarious and gregarious, remarkably confident and competent, a force to be reckoned with, including testifying with aplomb on the floor of the House and the Senate in Washington, D.C., and utterly at home in her own beautiful body. She would have adored you, Shaler, and she would have teased you endlessly. And my mom, who died from ovarian cancer when she was 62, is also here. The entire effort of this little book, well over 50 years in the making, has been for the sake of her suffering, more relentless and excruciating than any other I have ever witnessed up close, to be no longer hidden. Seed corn is my belated attempt to wrestle from her suffering some sort of meaning. overarching preoccupation of seed corn must not be ground is therefore the problem and meaning of suffering. Structured by a braiding of memoir and theology, the book ponders the deep human questions about meaning and existence, pain and loss, grief and sorrow that haunt us all, by exploring the internal contours of a life shaped by my mother's severe mental illness. Although the theological questions thread their way throughout, the first 4 chapters are framed largely as memoir. From sensing her disintegration even before I was born, to struggling for survival when the likelihood of any of us staying alive seemed impossibly remote, to undergoing inevitable collapse followed by partial healing, to cobbling a life and even sometimes flourishing in old age. Then the last chapter asks directly the question the father of Black liberation theology, James Cone, summons all of us to ponder. What theological intuitions emerge from this particular life? My intention in the book is to consider the personal and the particular, not in self-absorption or isolation, but as a lens for understanding and responding to the common plight of humanity and of the earth, with solidarity and compassion. While the structural arc of the book moves from absence to presence, from silence to words, from survival to precarious wholeness, and from isolation to tender connection, the bend of the arc is never assured. Our lives are complicated and often tragic, fraught with accidents and contingencies, detours and dead ends that sometimes, with grace, still lead to what womanist theologian Dolores Williams calls a way out of no way. In the midst of it all, perhaps the best we can do is hold to the manifesto expressed by Kathy Kollwitz in her 1942 lithograph, from which I draw the title of the book. In the image, a woman with fierce mien directed toward any who would threaten harm encircles several children in the shelter of her labor-hardened arms. With Kollwitz, let us say no more. No more sacrificing our children. No more grinding our seed corn. Seed corn was born out of finally finding words for the materiality of how our lives were shaped by my mom's mental illness. And I failed utterly in any search for meaning until I could express something of that materiality. This dirt, these twigs, these tears, these animals, and a lot of animals pad their way through this book. So I'd like to close by reading a few passages from the first chapter, and they're hard passages, and I apologize for that. The first chapter is called A Lexicon of Absence, and the epigraph is from Pseudo-Dionysius. What right has any creature to devise words? As we plunge into darkness, we shall find ourselves not simply running short of words, but actually speechless and unknowing. Breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat, during the fall, throughout the winter, and into the spring of 1950 to 51, while she was carrying me, my mother, Doris Irene Paulson Browne, 1928 to 1990, descended into madness. In the darkness of her womb, I went with her there to madness. I understand the word madness is more than problematic. So until now, when telling any scrap of her story or mine, in deference to using correct and inoffensive language, I have always used the term mental illness. Even now, when I tell a cleaned up version of her story, I still refer to her suffering that way, in hopes of not offending, upsetting, or frightening anyone. But this, at last, is not a cleaned up story and does not belong to the pristine world of clinical psychology, a resource utterly absent for her. And such careful language only serves to mask the reality of the torment she lived. So breath by breath, while she was carrying me, my mom descended into madness, and I went with her there to that place of torment. She did not always live in torment, though. I hold as treasures a few faded black and white, ruffled-edged snapshots of her as a young woman. In one, my mother, wearing dungarees and an oversized plaid flannel shirt, stands in front of her parents holding a huge largemouth bass. All three are smiling and playful as my grandmother gingerly tweaks the tail and my mother confidently grasps the barrel of the fish without a hint of revulsion. Her father, a gentle Swedish soul whom she adored, gazes down on her with affection. In another, she is perched on a tree stump in a dancer's pose, holding a full stringer of fish in one hand and resting the other on the head of her best friend, Colleen, who holds up a prize fish of her own. Both of them are laughing. In one last photograph, Doris and Colleen stand side by side, all dressed up in matching fashionable trousers and white blouses, fingers gently entwined. The day is beautiful and they are clearly joyful. This is the person she was and the person she was meant to be. An inveterate tomboy who loved trees and lakes, fishing and dogs, especially Mickey, her feisty Springer Spaniel, named after St. Paul's iconic Mickey's Diner, who hunted squirrels with her. A free spirit who wore dungarees and trousers and flannel shirts, and who, holding up a stringer of fish with pride and resting her hand playfully yet tenderly on the head of her best friend, pirouetted on a tree stump. I don't know what happened in the few years between when these photographs were taken and her marriage to my father and pregnancy with me. And I've asked myself over and over again, what happened to the radiant and vibrant young woman in these photographs? What happened to this Doris? And I torture myself with the question, why did I never get the chance to know her? I have some guesses, but they are mostly irrelevant now. At any rate, by the time she was pregnant with me, my parents lived in a tiny upstairs apartment in a house on the east side of St. Paul, where in winter smoke from the chimney sometimes sifted through the cracks in the walls in their kitchen. Grasping for details of rare stories, I do know that after my father left for work at the Farm Bureau each morning, Doris began going through each room of the apartment, fixing everything so it was perfect, so it was fine, there and there and there. She became more and more frantic as the days and weeks and months went on, her heart racing faster and faster, and mine faster still. Although I heard only fragments of these stories over the years, I already knew them from the inside out. With her, I righted the corner of every hanging dish towel, refolded every laundered shirt a half a dozen times, lined up the glasses in perfect order in the cupboard, and smoothed the cushions of the Davenport. I heard and felt her cries of agitation when the dish towel would not hang straight, the glasses not line up just right, or especially on a cold day when she could detect a whiff of chimney smoke and a speck of coal dust settled on the kitchen counter. In the face of her mounting anguish while still in the womb, I discerned the necessity of being still and invisible and taking up as little space as possible. So I came into the world quiet and vigilant, a good baby, who slept through the night almost immediately in my crib in the closet under the stairs to the attic and demanded little attention. This inherent stillness prepared me well for my first year of life, when my mother cared for her dying father in the last year of his. Every weekday, she put me in a wicker laundry basket, and my father dropped us off at our parents' home, so he and my grandmother could both go to work. Day in and day out, as his heart failed more and more, I lay in the basket next to my grandfather's chair. The only energy he had, he used to talk to Petunia over the rim of the basket. I have held fast to the tenderness of these stories because, in retrospect, it has become clear that he was the one person in my life for many years to come truly capable of kindness. When he died in February before my first birthday in April, my mother dropped the wicker basket as she ran from the car into her parents' house screaming, "No, no." In that moment, any tenuous hold she had on sanity collapsed, and there was no turning from that path. In her need for perfection and order, I'm sure many instantly assume a diagnosis of obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, as well they might, for had she ever received care, surely OCD would have been the diagnosis, or at least part of a diagnosis, which would have been much more complex and have at least included extreme anxiety and major depression, and likely even more dire words to describe a fractured mind. However, we didn't have those words then, and one of the things that has kept me from trying to tell her story now, before now, is that this is not a story about a 1950s housewife keeping a neat house, not even an excessively neat house. Her need for perfection carried the adage, a place for everything and everything in its place, to an incomprehensible and indescribable extreme. It represented a whole different order of order, and an adequate description has always eluded me, still eludes me, because describing absence is so much harder than describing presence. The word that comes to me now is apophatic, a beautiful, evocative word, usually reserved for mystics like Pseudo-Dionysius, who understand that all attempts to describe God must inevitably fail, and that the only way to even try is by way of the via negativa, where God is not. Although invoking such a profound and expansive word, a word filled with mystery, for describing the quotidian details of an individual life gives me great pause, particularly for fear of diminishment of reverence. Still, shifting to description mostly by way of absence for the first time in 70 years makes finding words somehow possible. As a person who loves language, for whom words are nearly, if not entirely sacred, language provides a compass in the search for meaning and truth. So I beg both patience and imagination. Though mostly taking refuge in silence, occasionally over the years I have struggled to describe the level of control her illness held over our lives, but almost always to no avail. After failed and ultimately abandoned attempts, I recently began to wonder if one way to elucidate the impact of her illness on the dailiness of all of our lives might be to shape a narrative around the rooms of a house: bedroom, living room, kitchen, bathroom, basement. One of the reasons I imagine this approach might work is that the level of control and constriction and regimentation she felt compelled to exert over the space we occupied in the world never changed. Whether I was 3 or 4 or 21, whether it was just me as a toddler or when my 3 brothers, Tim, Kevin, and Mike, and finally my little sister Sheila came along, house rules and parameters never wavered. No one except my mom was allowed to touch or use anything, or even be anywhere, except under strict surveillance and with extreme limitations. Any skewed detail anywhere in the house could spark her getting upset and result in an explosion of rage and violence. Everything had to be so perfectly ordered that actually living in the space was nearly impossible. I'll spare you most of the rooms, but we'll talk about the bathroom. Everyone's favorite room, right? So the bathroom. In some ways, as the potential for disorder was considerable, the bathroom posed the greatest threat to her equanimity. Unlike the kitchen, physical human needs made it impossible for her to put the bathroom completely off limits, so disorder was tamped down by still more stringent regimentation. We were allowed to take a bath only at an assigned time, in the order of oldest to youngest, with a time limit of 5 minutes, a few evenings a week. We weren't allowed to turn on the shower head because the water would spray too far, so we hunkered down in the tub using a rubber hose attached to the spout to rinse ourselves off. We were allowed to brush our teeth only in the morning, never after lunch or before bed. We had to ask permission to go to the bathroom and were not allowed to wash our hands afterwards because she would have to wipe down the sink and straighten the hand towel. After we were all finished with evening baths or morning teeth brushing, it would take her hours to fix the bathroom. So once baths and morning ablutions were finished, no one could turn on the water, open the medicine cabinet, or touch anything other than the toilet handle and toilet paper roll. Even so, she needed to go in and smooth the last sheet on the roll of toilet paper after anyone used the toilet. We had no privacy for the most private of human functions, and were not allowed to shut the bathroom door for fear that we would violate the rules of touching something. When I was 6 or 7, I remember being sick to my stomach, running to the bathroom, and leaning over the toilet bowl to throw up. My mother rushed in behind me, grabbed the back of my head, and pushed it down toward the water and the vomit until everything blurred and the sour smell poured into my nose. Forcing my head down, she screamed, "Get your head down, for God's sake, you'll have it all over the place. God damn it, son of a bitch, get your head down." My body went rigid against the force of her hand and the wail of her voice, and she yelled, "Ray, get in here, for God's sake, get in here." My father came and with his greatest strength pushed my head into the vomit until it poured back down my throat and everything went black. When I came to on the bathroom floor, I heard him trying to soothe her. "It's okay, Doris, it's okay." The last little section I would like to share with you is about going to kindergarten, where I found out that people laughed. By the time I started kindergarten in the fall of 1956, I knew all the rules, especially the rule about keeping secrets. I must never tell anyone what our lives were like, a secret to be protected at all costs, always. Never tell a word. At the same time, my kindergarten class at Hayden Heights Elementary School was an epiphany for me, as I caught glimpses of how other kids lived, and I studied them and my teacher, Miss Tubasing, intently. Their easy laughter and her kindness rocked my world, instilling in me an insatiable and ultimately dangerous longing to be normal. Normal became a holy word, the holy word, in my 5-year-old lexicon. I wanted to be someone else, almost any other kid in my class would do. Of course, I did not know their own close-kept secrets, nor did I understand then that as Black liberation theologian James Cone, with echoes of Soren Kierkegaard, understood so well. When people do not want to be themselves, but somebody else, that is utter despair. But it didn't feel like despair then. It felt like hope, false though it may have been, and it gave me the courage to take unwise risks. These were the days when parents sent kindergartners off on a couple-mile walk to school without a second thought. I was totally enchanted by the freedom of those solitary walks. But enchantment got me in trouble because sometimes I forgot the rules, the keep clean and stay neat rules. I remember walking home from school in the rain, wearing a red hooded raincoat with breast buckles and a corduroy collar, and matching red rubber boots over my shoes. Instead of hurrying straight home, I dawdled and stomped in puddles. When I got home, I was thrashed for being late and for getting my socks wet. After that, I hurried straight home. No more wet socks. Even so, school kept igniting little fires of resistance. During free playtime, which accounted for a lot of kindergartners' half day of school in those days, I ignored the giant-sized dollhouse which drew all the girls, but which I found nauseatingly boring, and instead spent my time with the boys at the workbench that had real hammers and saws and plenty of chunks of wood. I hammered together as many pieces as I could to build a boat or a barn, every time without foreseeing that it would be tossed in the garbage can at home as stupid, messy junk. It must not have deterred me much, though, because in a box of mementos my mother put together for each of us when she knew she was dying, my box included a handwritten note from Miss Tubasing remarking that Pat is able to handle both hammer and saw with dexterity. In the scheme of things, most of my breaks for freedom and gestures toward normalcy were relatively harmless. Socks dried, boats and barns disappeared into garbage cans, bruises and welts healed, but one was not harmless, not at all harmless. On the way home from school one day, inspiration struck. It suddenly came to me how to cure my mom so we could be normal and therefore happy. I finally had a solution to the sorrow I had lived with all my 5 years. It was so simple and so obvious that I wondered why my father had not hit on it long before now. If Mom just got used to things being a bit cluttered and messy, she wouldn't have to make them fine here and here and here anymore. And there would be no more explosions, no more swearing, no more beatings, no more being so scared for her and for us. So filled with reckless courage, fostered by hope, I hatched a plan. When I got home, my little brother Tim was crying in his high chair. So as soon as I had wriggled out of my school dress and into my dungarees and t-shirt, I tried to get him to stop fussing while Mom hung up my red plaid dress next to the green plaid one, 5 in all, one for each day of the week. It took a really long time because it was difficult to get the bows in the back to be straight and even. Finally, we ate our graham crackers with milk poured over them. While she was washing dishes after lunch, I snuck into the bathroom, quietly shut the door, and went to work. I pulled askew the towel and the shower curtain, ran water in the sink, used the bar of soap to wash my hands and face, brushed my teeth, leaving a glob of toothpaste in the sink, stirred vials around in the medicine cabinet, even ran water in the bathtub. My heart beat quickly, not with fear for once, but with eagerness for all the coming happier days and years. Finally satisfied with my work, I shut off the light and went to sit next to my brother on the living room floor and zipped through Goldilocks and the Three Bears, hardly able to contain my impatience or my joy. After putting away our few lunch dishes, talking them repeatedly into straightness in the cupboard, Mom made her own trip to the bathroom. Within seconds, I heard a cry more anguished than I had ever heard before or since. Sitting there on the rug, I dropped my book and felt my heart beating wildly in my ears. She rushed out into the living room screaming, "What have you done in there?" She picked me up and shook me frantically until my bones rattled, but I could not make any words come out to answer her question. All the while, I stared into her eyes, wild and shining and somehow terrified. Finally, she threw me down in the hallway across from the door to the bathroom, always our place of exile and punishment. Then, half sobbing, half cursing, my mother slammed the bathroom door and spent the whole afternoon putting everything back in place, back in order, shouting every once in a while in a shrieking voice, much more animal than human, "What else did you do in here?" I don't remember if I tried to answer or not. Once, when she quieted for a minute, I opened the door a crack and peered in. She was lying curled up on the floor, whimpering. But when she saw me, she slammed the door shut with her foot and screamed, "Get the hell out of get the hell out of here, you goddamn little bitch." Sobbing, I begged for forgiveness over and over again. "I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. I'm sorry, I'll make it better. Please don't cry. I'm sorry, I'll make it better." But she only howled louder. This agony I had wrought was the result of desperately wanting to be someone else. Someone with a happy, messy house where we told stories and laughed together over supper, where a dog like Simba might even sleep with me on the bed, where a little spilt milk or cookie crumbs might go unnoticed on the kitchen counter, where I did not live in terror of finding my mother or my little brother dead when I got home from kindergarten. The despair of that day was that I had failed utterly. I was never going to be someone else because I could not make my mother better. I could not make her eyes light or our house happy. And most of all, I finally and forever understood no help was coming. Thank you for listening to that with such patience. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. All right, we now are going to turn to our 4 panelists, and we will begin with Dr. Wesley Wildman.
Greetings, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Can I get a thumbs up? Excellent. It's a privilege for me to be with you this evening. Pat has become one of my personal heroes. She's a spiritual sibling, and from very different places, I'm following her along a pathway that I think of as a journey towards the appreciation of suchness. It's a beautiful thing that she's managed to do with her life and with this book. When I first read Seed Corn, I was upset and frankly angry because of the searing truths of the story. But I was also profoundly grateful for the resilience it recounts. I also appreciated the disciplined conceptual moves that Pat makes. She shows us a theologically elegant and resilient lifeway, tested in a host of circumstances and steadily consolidating into a serene capaciousness of soul. This feels like the right kind of miracle for our time, not through supernatural interventions, but through a lifelong demonstration of the meaning-making power, especially of companionship. Wildhouse Publishing exists to publish books like this. The task that Dr. Wheeler has assigned me today is to tell you about the press's mission and to situate the decision to publish Pat's memoir in a wider context. I would love to speak about the book itself, which I absorbed earlier than most with love and respect, but I'm going to obey and do exactly what Demian told me to do. Have you ever tried to think about our present cultural and religious moment from 100 years into the future, looking back? I do this all the time. This lens leads me to see our moment as close to the fulcrum of a multi-century transition I call the end of the axial age. I interpret the significance of Pat's memoir in terms of that massive disruption. I shall explain. For 25 centuries, magnificent axial institutions have defined community, justice, and meaning making. They enabled priests to wrest power from divine-like kings, enshrined human hope in cosmological doctrinal edifices, articulated shared moral visions, and underwrote social stability for billions of people. Yet these institutions depend on cosmologized worldviews and supernatural authorizations that dissolve in the presence of the goods of increasing existential security, education, pluralism, and freedom. The cruel irony is that the axial traditions themselves gave rise to the very conditions that dissolved their foundations. Reversal is possible only by attacking those same goods, which is a price few societies will tolerate for long. No axial religion is arresting this change, and whether axial worldviews can adapt is an open question. So far, they haven't. The slow disintegration of axial institutions has no impact on the human drive to make meaning. People still need to interpret their experiences, to love and be loved in spiritual communities, to access wise support in their spiritual journeys, and to feel morally oriented to life's inevitable challenges. The urgent question for the ever increasing numbers of post axial people is how to make sense of life without implausible worldviews, fragile doctrinal frameworks, and controlling sociality. In these transitional centuries, post-axial people often feel adrift, without reliable guidance for their spiritual quests, caught between wisdom of the past they no longer believe and an open future they don't know how to navigate. This is why Wildhouse Publishing exists, to create carefully curated resources for this transition moment. Wildhouse is part of Just Horizons Alliance, a non-profit that works on other long-range aspects of this transition, including AI ethics and unintended side effects of social complexity. But technological problem solving and ethical guardrails alone will not be enough to navigate the revolutions ahead. We also need to address the fundamental sources of meaning and motivation that support human agency and define the values we most prize. That is the domain of spirituality, and it is essential to everything Just Horizons does, including Wildhouse Publishing. The literary voices we most need in this domain right now are those who shed axial conventions decisively and reach into the heart of reality for transformational perspectives that resonate with people in the middle of this vast, protracted global transformation. Pat is one of those voices, combining deep learning with lyrical prose and unflinching honesty, and manifesting a decidedly post-axial form of worship, which is deference to the actual with no evasion, no hubris. On behalf of Wildhouse Publishing, I am honoured to place Pat's extraordinary book in the hands of readers seeking what she has painstakingly won in turbulent circumstances, a serene capaciousness of soul. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wildman. Wow, Pat, congratulations on all that. All right, Ryan, our next respondent is our student respondent, actually no longer a student, a recent alum, Ryan McLaughlin. I turn the floor over to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Dr. Wheeler. And good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. It is such a joy to be with you all this evening to celebrate not just a wonderful book, but the incredible author who wrote this book. Like most of you, I'm sure Pat is not just someone I'm privileged to call a friend, but also someone I deeply admire. And I can't tell you how much it meant to me when she invited me to be a part of this event. In my life, I've received exactly 2 emails that made me cry. Both of them were written by Dr. Pat Browne. They were both occasioned by Pat having read papers I'd written for Dr. Wheeler's classes, and both contained her responses to those papers. Now, it wasn't her kind words and her encouraging affirmations that brought me to tears, though I'm sure that if you know Pat, you'll be unsurprised to hear that both emails contained plenty of kindness and heaps of encouragement. No, what caused my eyes to water up while I read those emails was that in each of them, Pat made me feel seen. Pat both read the words on the page and saw the person who was trying to express himself through those words. That feeling of being truly seen is a gift that I will always cherish, all the more so because in this isolating and digital age in which we live, it's an increasingly rare blessing. In this new book of hers, Seed Corn Must Not Be Ground, Pat gives us all a different, though I think complimentary gift. She invites us, her readers, to see her. In the pages of this book, we are invited to see a young Pat suffering in incomprehensible ways, barely surviving a childhood marred by her mother's mental illness, her father's cruelty, and the rigidity and harshness of pre-Vatican II Catholic school and parish life. We are invited to see Pat in her early adult years, trying to find her way through confusing and isolating mazes of religious life and academia. We're invited to see Pat fall head over heels into a beautiful love story, and then weep with her as that love story is cut tragically short by illness. We are invited to see her come to know and find healing in the companionship of animals, and then, perhaps much less likely, in the companionship of seminarians. We are asked to look at the events of her life through Pat's own eyes, and then, as if it wasn't already a supremely generous gift, we're invited to ponder the theological significance of her experiences alongside of her. This is truly an adventure because Pat is not interested in facile answers or trite formulas. She's interested in hard-won beauty. Not, mind you, beauty as distraction or entertainment, but beauty as a kind of messy soteriology. In one instance, Pat shares with her readers about sharing a slice of Wonder Bread with her neighbor's golden retriever named Simba. She writes, "Blasphemous as it may sound, these scraps of Wonder Bread, shared with an old dog long before my first communion, were as sacramental and salvific as any Eucharist I have ever shared with anyone. Simba offered mercy and tenderness in a world bereft of either." End quote. After seeing the communion with Simba through Pat's eyes, I couldn't help but relate to the disciples who walked the road to Emmaus with the resurrected Christ. Were not our hearts burning within us? Dostoevsky once said that beauty will save the world. And when you see the world through Pat's eyes, when you see the beauty in golden retrievers and herding horses, and maple seeds in Minnesota lakes, and Mary Oliver's poetry and James Cone's theology, and deep friendships and found family, you start to suspect that old Fyodor might have been onto something. Not, mind you, because this beauty somehow lets an omniscient creator God off the hook. His eye is not on the sparrow, as Pat reminds us. But because even though all of life is, to use Pat's phrase, cobbled together, we are nevertheless able to cobble together something of astounding beauty to give to the world that comes after us. Pat's invitation isn't merely to see the beauty in a life cobbled together amidst tragedy. No, her project of theological seeing is far more ambitious than that. Pat wants us to see the sacred literally everywhere. This is true even when, perhaps especially when, life juxtaposes the beautiful and the tragic in ways we can't ignore. To share a passage that hammered this point home for me from her writing, she writes, many of us who hike backwoods trails and even backyard paths in springtime have unexpectedly stumbled upon a spotted fawn curled in perfect stillness, waiting for its mother to return from foraging. Thankfully, we know this is not a picture of abandonment, but of care, and we pass by quietly, without touching or stirring, yet carry the image of the fawn's dark eyes following our passing for the rest of our days. But especially in the fall, we have also, with no surprise at all because it is so common, come upon the truck-struck carcass of a deer sprawled on the side of the road. As the days pass, the body becomes bloated, brazenly gnawed at by eagles, ravens, and turkey vultures by day, and surreptitiously by all manner of prowlers and scavengers by night. Pushed further and further into the ditch by snowplows all winter long, by spring all that remains is her exposed ribcage, sprung open and empty of nourishment for any roaming creatures. The beautiful and the horrible, the sweet and the bitter, the beginning of life and the end can never be separated. Nothing is profane. All is sacred. The hollow carcass of the doe no less than the fawn waiting for its mom. And then, after asking us to truly see her, to truly see beauty, to truly see the whole world as sacred, Pat challenges us to be with the world, to be people of reckless compassion and courageous grace. At one point early in the book, Pat puts her vision for being compassionately with this messy world this way. She says, quote, "The world needs a lot more aunties. Let's all be aunties." Amen. And may we all find strength to follow Pat's example in that regard. Pat, thank you so much for seeing and for inviting us all to see with you. I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the conversation this evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Just beautiful. Wow. Okay, friends, we now turn the floor over to our faculty respondent, Dr. Andrew Patton.
Good evening to all of you. It is such a delight, Pat, to be on a panel with you and folks like John and Demian and Ryan and Wesley. And just what an honor it is to get to sit around a book and think together about a book in this moment in American political life. So thank you for conjuring us for this moment and for all of you for being here. As we respond to Pat's truly exquisite memoir, it feels a little bit like the tables have turned. As many of us know personally, Pat is an extraordinarily engaging reader of other people's texts. I've personally benefited from this. I heard Ryan mention this too. When I first came to United, Pat asked graciously to read my dissertation and proceeded to read every single page of this painfully overwrought academic manuscript that would truly require the patience of a saint to get all the way through. Well, as I soon learned, Pat is an actual saint. Wheeler read it too, but his bona fides for sainthood are a little bit more dubious, I think. Over the next several days, I received these long, meditative emails from Pat, one for each chapter. She tracked every line of argumentation, offered commentary on the ethical valence of what I was saying, as well as literary style. And of course, she bestowed upon me the gift of her incessantly generous, heartfelt encouragement. I left that encounter edified, in the best sense of the term, built up. And this is how many of us at United have come to know Pat, as a teacher of theological writing who doubles as a spiritual mentor. To be a student of Pat, which is a category that includes many of us seminary professors, is to discover the sacramental character of theological writing, where words take on flesh and nourish souls with the bread of life. So this figure of Pat, the teacher of theological writing, allows me to frame my remarks with a question. What is Pat trying to teach us in this gorgeously composed, spiritually luminous book? As you've all heard, I think she's teaching us something with every word, but I will limit my remarks to 3 lessons. The first concerns the art of figuring human life in the medium of words. How do you get these marks on a page to reveal something of the texture of human existence? And Pat's lesson, I think, can be boiled down to something James Baldwin once said in an interview with the Paris Review. He writes, quote, "Don't describe it, show it. Don't describe a purple sunset, make me see that it is purple," end quote. Just consider these images that flow from Pat's pen. A little child sleeping like a piece of paper slipped into an envelope, desperate not to disturb their bedsheets for fear of upsetting their imperiously fastidious mother. The same child getting down on her hands and knees after dinner to comb the fringe of the rug under the dining room table, frantic to sow a little order in the chaos of a home disfigured by mental illness. A sloppy sniff from a bull moose. A knowing caress from a 1,250-pound horse. And in the book's most profoundly moving image, for me at least, Pat brings her readers into the bed that she shared with her beloved wife, Aggie, tenderly cupping her body around Aggie's cancer-ridden one, confessing to her, receiving absolution in return, and accompanying her beloved across the threshold of life and death, quote, holding her cooling body in the quiet of the deepening snow. The writing here is just exquisite. Not in some architectonic or formal sense, but in the gritty, visceral way that Pat renders these humans and non-human life forms as vivid, animate creatures that simmer with pathos. I can't tell you how many times I was sitting in my front yard reading this when I was overwhelmed by these passages, wiping away salty fluid from my eyes, but also just taking a moment to let these images sink down into my gut, where they remain and their impression will endure. Though I've never lived through the lifeless conformity of the 1950s in St. Paul, the image of children slipping into bed-shaped envelopes made me feel that. The meticulous inanity of combing the fringes of the rug made me see the tragedy of mental illness. and the feebleness of all of our very understandable attempts to try to paper over the void. And while I have not lost a beloved, my reading of this book has taught me what to look for when I do. The second lesson concerns the relationship between narrative and theology. There are plenty of memoirs that tell moving human stories without muttering the name of the divine at all. And there's plenty of theologians who fill thick tomes with speculations about the infinite without saying a single story. And there's plenty of other theologians who just think that theology simply is a matter of telling compelling stories. Pat charts another path, and she wades into this tensive field in a recognizably Augustinian way, I think. Like the Bishop of Hippo, who she cites approvingly several times, Pat shifts the genre between chapters 4 and 5, as Augustine did between books 9 and 10 of the Confessions, though not without losing voice. I think voice remains consistent throughout, where the first 4 chapters narrate events in her life, and the final one draws some more speculative conclusions about the God who is and is not revealed in the story that she's recounted. So after limning the texture of suffering and the catastrophes of grace and moving image that she presents in Pat's life, we find ourselves contemplating metaphysical and cosmological matters, with Pat championing a pantheistic collapse of the God-world relation, a position that is certainly more at home at United than it would have been in Augustine's Hippo, I think. But this departure shouldn't overshadow what I see as a deeper alignment between the two, where the act of self-narration itself, of striving to make some sense out of one's own life, inevitably puts us in touch with profound theological questions about the whence and whither and fundamental constitution of existence. You can tell a moving story about your life without attending to these questions at all. Most memoirs do. And you can speculate about the nature of God until you're blue in the face without saying a single story. But as Pat teaches us here, theological writing is better when you do both and not confusing both. The third lesson brings me to my third lesson, or to Pat's third lesson, which has to do precisely with this more speculative dimension of Pat's work. As someone who prefers his God-world relationship with a little more daylight between the two, I have to admit that reading this, I felt the force of this vision of a God who is so utterly with the world, who abides so profoundly with it and in the suffering of all creatures who find our home here, as to refuse any separation at all. It's a testament to Pat's literary and theological finesse that she made me feel this, the force of this vision. But I also felt another force at play in reading this, one contained in the book's title itself. Seed corn must not be ground. This line, which she tells us is borrowed from Goethe by way of the 20th century German artist Käthe Kollwitz, is a moral imperative that appears to be absolutely binding. Kollwitz herself confirms this. I dug around and found a diary entry from 1941, December, when she writes this, quote, "Seed corn must not be ground. This, like the call for there to be war no more, is no sentimental wish, but a commandment, a demand," end quote. These kinds of commandments are traditionally depicted as coming from on high. Whether those heights are atop Mount Sinai for Moses, or the sublime pinnacle of practical reason for Kant, or the infinite claim radiating from the face of every human being that says, "Thou shalt not kill me," for Levinas. But in each case, the height is emphasized. Such heights denote for these thinkers an unbridgeable chasm between the one who issues the claim and the one who responds. They represent a binding authority from which the respondent cannot escape, from which even a refusal to respond itself constitutes a response. In all times and in all places across geographical and cultural locations, the lives of the vulnerable, and especially the lives of vulnerable children, must not be ground down into dust. The force of this claim resounds in every word Pat has written. One cannot read this volume without feeling that conviction. And yet, in a cosmos without these kinds of chasms, where the heights of Mount Sinai collapse so exhaustively into worldly immanence, I found myself wondering where on earth these ethical demands originate from, and what to make of the absoluteness of their claims on our lives. Can this immanent worldly vision support the weight, the gravity of these absolute demands? And this, I suspect, is just as Pat would want it. No easy answers, no final conclusions, just a community of readers marveling at the tensions of our fragile, earthbound existence, our minds stretching to think more than can be thought, our voices reaching out to one another as we collectively plumb the depths of existence before God. And for these kinds of lessons, we can have no finer teacher than Pat Browne.
Thank you, Dr. Packman. Beautiful. I'll resist the temptation to respond to that. And now turn the floor over to our final respondent tonight, Dr. John Thatomenal.
Well, I should have known I was going to be in trouble trying to follow in these footsteps. Good Lord. The first thing I want to say, though, is to thank this community for taking such loving care of my dear friend. So my being here is a simple return, a thank you for what you already do for her. And those of you who have not yet read the book know that it would not have been possible without you all. All right, let me get going. Stranded inside our own lives. That arresting phrase from Claire Carlyle's lovely book, Transcendence for Beginners, Life Writing and Philosophy, speaks of an intuition that routinely haunts me, that each of us is ineluctably trapped inside our own minds, largely captive to seeing life from within the space of our skulls, peering out through our peepers and trying to take in and make sense of all we see. Our access to the felt sense of others' lives, how others experience life, depends largely on the grace of shared narratives like seed corn. A memoir is a precious passport that affords entry into another country with its distinctive soulscape and singular vista. A memoir grants us escape from a kind of solipsism to which each of us is sentenced, evinced in the temptation to write ourselves into the role of the main character in the story of our lives. But there is another, entirely other sort of becoming stranded that takes place in trauma. Trauma strips you of the mere possibility of even fancying yourself as the main character in your own life. Trauma strands you into the captivity of your abusers and their needs. Pat, as you know, finds herself living a perpetual vigilance that marks the end of everything. Her own life, but more importantly, the lives and loves of those precious to her. Seed corn transports us into this harrowing prison house in which Pat is compelled to abide by her mother's madness, but far more by her father's cruel indifference and complicity, his venal unwillingness to shield Pat and her beloved siblings from the ravages of her mother's madness. Seed corn is a jailbreak story, a Minnesota rather than a Shawshank Redemption. But the captivity in question, and this is a point to which I return, is not remotely the prison cell of her own life. What makes this narrative vital to this precious place here at United, that figures so prominently in Pat's narrative, is that Pat's captors were not just her mother's madness and her cruel father, but an entire theological history that valorized her captivity under the moniker of sacrifice, substitution, and surrogacy. Prison breaks are all but impossible to begin with, to pull off, but all the more so when an entire tradition sings hymns of praises to the nobility and beauty of your captivity. A tradition that insists that, as Pat puts it so eloquently, one must spend oneself down to zero, sanctifies the jail cell and calls it holy, thereby making it utterly impossible to think the transgressive thought of simply wanting one's own well-being. Of course, the tradition has always designated this supposedly salvific labor of self-eviscerating service unequally, most especially to the racialized and to women and girls, and of course, multiply so to racialized women and girls. No wonder then that this jailbreak narrative has to be theological and must chart its emancipatory pathway through the resources gathered from Black theology and especially womanist theology. Dear Pat, as a white woman, you might have noticed, is scrupulously concerned about the risks of appropriating resources that are not rightfully hers. But who else in the theological world has, with such absolute urgency, commended the sheer worth of surviving, other than the womanist theological trajectory initiated by Dolores Williams? Who else has contested the paeans that have been sung to the gory manacles of cruciform living and insisted that there is, in that way, the danger of absolute self-destruction? From Williams and from Pat's life story, as she tells it, we, all of us, learn what many of us never do, that it is a true and worthy good to exercise agency and control over one's own life. The survivor of trauma is, as I have already stated, not stranded within their own lives. Not nearly. They have yet to reach the capacity to live their own lives, to imagine life trajectories, and to dream of possibilities for generativity and self-expression. All this is impossible for those imprisoned within such dire captivity. All the more so when theology conspires to deny to the vulnerable the simple dignity and joy of living their own lives. For those who find themselves bound to conditions such as Pat did in childhood, indeed, even as an early adult, it takes immense daring and grace simply to want one's own well-being. And that too from within a tradition that celebrates, strangely and beautifully, the words of Jesus, "I have come that you might have life and life more abundantly." What a gift to have that wanting for oneself, the longing for an abundant life, rather than a life spent down to zero. Of course, Pat's story is not really a story about Pat engineering her own jailbreak. Andy Dufresne does all the digging. Reference to the movie if you've seen it. All 19 years worth of it by himself. But in this story, there is an entire ensemble of characters who are digging from the outside all along. Without the neighbor's dog, without a gentle moose, without Solstice, the dog, with a beloved teacher who diagrams sentences, heck, without the documents of Vatican II, without United Theological Seminary, and a particular theologian most of all, whom I'm proud to claim as a former student, and above all, without Aggie, it is not clear whether there would have been any jailbreak. What that means is that 2 words that I have spoken so far are wholly inadequate. And this is the greatest gift of Pat's book for me, a gift so beautifully granted to us that words fail. And those words are the words inside and outside. I began with Carlyle's phrase, stranded inside our own lives, and just now digging from the outside. What seed corn shows us is that neither of these words is remotely adequate for the kinds of beings we are. There are no sharp inside and no stark outsides for porous beings such as ourselves. We are never truly trapped within a hard-walled boundary. Perhaps that is the worst and most troubling effect of trauma, to persuade us of the lie that we are imprisoned. And of course, we must name the troubling truth, the truth that Pat refuses to shy away from, that some are tragically unable to escape the prison cells constructed by their oppressors. Still, and in the end, Pat's book is a testimony to the world's many loves, loves that graciously visited her in her bleakest moments. The world was insistently whispering its I love yous to Pat. At all times, and somehow, miraculously, Pat managed to hear them, even in her darkest night. No almighty God came charging in from on high to rescue her from Pharaoh's grasp. No grand liberating Exodus narrative, but instead now a dog, now a moose, now a horse named Oliver, now a riotous Aggie. Each and every one manifestations of divinity in disguise. To read this book is to be equipped to see the world anew. I write about non-dualism. Pat lives it. For Pat, there is no bush that is not always already burning. You do not have to make the trek to Sinai. Just look out your window. There is not a scintilla of difference between God and the world. Not now, not ever. It is all God. It is all either holy or none of it is. I love this book almost as much as I love Pat. That's saying something. Pat, thank you for this immense treasure. May it be a healing balm to many, a balm that equips many who are still, and perhaps always learning to cherish our own lives and the holy world that makes these lives possible. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for those beautiful, beautiful words. We picked a great panel, Pat. Incredible responses, everybody. Thank you so much for those thoughtful reflections. We have time for a few questions here. Dr. Sabiataniska has a mic in the back. I have a mic here. And T. Michael is monitoring Zoom. The questions could be for Pat. They could be for the panelists. Let's get a brief conversation going, and then we'll give instructions for the book signing. So questions?
Hey, Pat, it's Lynn in the back. So when did you begin to claim your voice? When did you know that, that part of you could, in fact, I could use words like liberated and, generative and all that stuff, but when did you claim yourself? How old were you, and what was the set of circumstances? Because that leads to the pathway that got us here tonight. Thank you.
I'm not sure if I know how to answer that, Lynn. The longing to do so is really old. And there were attempts earlier that completely failed because I couldn't find a voice, and I couldn't. And part of it was, I longed to tell a story for two reasons: for my mom's sake, that her life not be lost, and also to break the silence, because that rule was hard. But I couldn't do it. And part of it was that I couldn't see the point, in the sense that I never wanted it to be, this happened and I survived. That was not the story. And so when the possibility of really, really tightly weaving, inextricably weaving the personal and the questions that nobody can answer, then it was able to unfold. I don't know if that helps or not.
We have an online question from Suzanne. Pat, when is your next book?
Oh, dear hearts, I'm 75. There's not going to be a next book.
Pat, first, thank you so much for sharing this with us and bearing your soul like this. So powerful. Thank you. I actually have a lot of questions, but the one was Dr. Wildman spoke of this. We're in this post-axial age, and I don't know to what extent you would agree with that, but do you think your message is one for this kind of lostness that he was speaking of? Thank you.
I hope so. I mean, clearly I don't think there's any denying that we are at a really hard turning point, and it could go completely wrong. It's too much to say that this little book has anything to do with hopefully going toward love, toward compassion, toward the holy instead of toward evil. But if that's even in the realm of possibility, we can't keep killing our children. I don't know if that even remotely touches what you're asking.
Pat, we have a question online. Here's Frank.
Oh, Pat, so nice to see you. And I read I got the book yesterday, and I was voraciously reading the first chapter. Unfortunately, I have so many other obligations, so I'll have to wait till the weekend. But was it a conscious choice early on to avoid the easier path that allows bitterness and anger and resentment to take root and pass on the suffering? Because despite that lack of nurturing, and I'm sure many of your students have received from you, is nothing but care and patience and kindness. And yes, nurturing of budding theological writers, of whom I am lucky to be one.
Oh, Frank is one of my dear students, and we were together last semester, and the voice that he has found for himself and the confidence and courage to speak is just, warms my heart. In order to answer your question, Frank, I think we give what we most need. I think it's really that simple. I don't think it's any more complicated than that. So if that's what you experience, Frank, then yeah, it's because we all do. We all get what we most need. I don't think it's really, really simple.
Thanks, Pat. Go ahead, Molly.
Pat, this is such a luminous conversation tonight. It took me 3 times reading it to begin to decipher all that you're saying. Certainly I agree that there's no deus ex machina swooping in, fixing everything. You do quote Mircea Eliade, though, 2 times, to talk about a portal to transcendence. Does the collapse allow for transcendence in the midst?
Oh, Molly. I believe it does, in the sense that, and believe's not even the right word, I experience that it does, in the sense that it's just literally true for me that everything becomes transcendent. It's immanence and transcendence are not different anymore. And I don't know how to explain that. I certainly can't defend it intellectually. That's not in the realm of possibility for me. But go for it, John. Please.
I already have. No, that's my job. Right? As a theologian of non-dualism, it's my job to make that kind of an argument. That transcendence ought never to be spatialized, to have begun with. Transcendence never meant out there somewhere. And that grave spatializing mistake is responsible for so many theological dead ends. Transcendence means a kind of uncontainable luminosity that is everywhere at all times.
Preach.
Right? And when you see it, we Christians, I'm speaking from the Christian half of my psyche now, maybe it's a third, we'll use the word God. But as Wesley did, speaking Buddhist language, might say suchness. And Anant Anant Rambachan and I, in our, now with my Hindu third, if these things are mathematical, will say Brahman. Aham Brahmasmi, I am, the world is divine. So the vocabularies are many. I suppose the only argument I would have would be against Wesley. Maybe some of these axial traditions had long ago started a more worldly turn than we give them credit for. But that's another squabble for another time.
John, I think uncontainable luminosity may be the best language.
Yes. I mean, that's what this book is about. And Pat clearly is somebody who seems capable of seeing this more often on most days than most of us seem to get to.
Indeed. Yes. Maybe one more.
Hi, Pat. It's Audrey.
Hi, Audrey.
I love seeing your face. It's only been 2 months, but it's so good to see you.
You too.
I haven't read this book, obviously, but listening to your passages, I saw my own family, and I saw my own childhood homes. So obviously, I can't be in your shoes, but I understand a lot that I think I just describe my family to people as complicated. My relationship to them is very complicated. And I think you very much understand that complexity. So hopefully you understand the complexity of this question that I'm going to ask. Even after this journey of divine exploration, self-exploration, and writing this book, did you ever feel ownership of yourself again after this lifetime of control? And the second part of that question is ownership of the self even like the appropriate framing of that question in your theological view?
Oh, that last part is really interesting. Wow, Audrey, I'm really not sure what to say. Ownership of myself, do I even want to use that word? I'm not sure I want to use that word. I don't want to be owned even by myself. I want to be claimed by beauty. I want to be claimed by the world and be able to be part of it instead of completely isolated from it. It's more of a laying down than a picking up. More, more of a laying down than a picking up. If that makes any.
I think that very much makes sense. You have to make space for the openness.
Only I think there's the ownership word might not be quite the right word, but there's a reason why now when Pat writes in this memoir about spending herself, she never feels like it's being spent down to zero.
Right.
There's a fund there that seems maybe inexhaustible. And that fund is in some sense hers, some sense not, because there is this porosity everywhere in this book between her and the world. But there's a site where the generativity emerges, the book emerges, the love emerges. She's not a vacuum. So even if ownership is not the right word, there's a self. It's a mighty self. Although, of course, all us Buddhists get nervous about that word.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, there's,
Go ahead, go please, and then we'll have one more question.
There's a sense now, Audrey, of loving fills up instead of empties out, and it makes it possible to breathe.
Pat, this is a comment, not a question. But hello, hi Pat.
Mary is a co-conspirator from the very beginning of this. This would not be without her.
Well, I loved this book from the first heart-rending page of the manuscript I read before it was a book. It is so poignant, and it is so theologically sophisticated in new ways. It's a kind of new, creative, liberating way of writing theology. It's what we need, and what people will be grateful for. I'm grateful for it. So let me say one more time, I loved it.